Hello and welcome to the Avenue Uniting Church in Blackburn, Victoria. My name's Rob Peppiatt and I have the privilege of being the minister of the Word in the congregation here. This morning my reflection is based on a reading from Mark's Gospel, chapter 13. Mark tells us in this way. As Jesus and his disciples came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, see what large stones and what large buildings." And Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that these things are all about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumours of wars, do not be alarmed. This will take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famine. This is but the beginning of the birth pangs." I want to say a sentence and invite you to finish it. However you want. No right or wrong answers. Don't overthink it. Perhaps just listen to your first thought. You ready? Here it comes. Faith looks forward. I wonder what you came up with. For me, it was just one word. Always. Faith looks forward. Always. Now, there are many other good answers, I know, but that's mine for now. Now, I know I'm on safe ground, definitionally, even though that's not a word, but I know I'm on safe ground because when we look to the past or look around us in the in the present, we venture into knowing, and that's different from faith. When you know something, there's a level of certainty to it that isn't faith. But more importantly than linguistic truth is a theological truth. And it's this. To live in Christian faith is to take a stand on the future. It is to say that there is a future and that however we name God, God is in that future, I should say. To put it bluntly, we might also say that without a future, there's no point to faith. To live in Christian faith is to take a stance on the future. What's really important as we attend to the story from Mark's Gospel that I've just read to you. We believe that as Mark's Gospel was being drawn together and written, the impressive temple written about in this story or spoken about in the story had already been destroyed or would soon be so. This was in the period of the Jewish revolt against Rome in 66 to 70 of the Common Era, a revolt which ended very, very badly for Jerusalem in particular. The city was largely destroyed in 70 CE. The temple was desecrated and pretty much levelled. All that was left is the Western or the Wailing Wall that we know today. Nothing else remained of Herod's grand, formidable and beautiful temple. Now, even if Mark is writing before the debacle of 70 AD and the flattening of the temple, it wouldn't take much imagination for his reader to know that it would happen. The people had long ago worked out that unrest in Judea would bring the temple under Roman threat. It was, after all, the centre of life and culture as well as the religion. And so, by the time of Mark's Gospel, Jesus' words here in Mark echo a stark and brutal truth. Mark's readers and those from whom he drew his stories would remember how those same words would be used in Jesus' trial to condemn him as a blasphemer. But is that the only reason Mark includes this story and Jesus' prophecy as some kind of giant "I told you so"? What other point might there be? Certainly, there's form in the scriptures for the "I told you so" approach. A great deal of the prophetic writings and stories reflect this as the prophets help people interpret theologically or in God talk the things that have happened to them as a people. And there's quite probably something of this in Mark's approach as well. But it's rarely just "I told you so" with the prophets. There's almost always an encouragement to look forward, to see, or in extreme cases, imagine God's restoration of the people and their nation. It's probably not too strong a point to say that that's the point of the prophets. And that's why their visions and their dreams and their poetic writings and their rants were preserved. They were seen to speak with the voice of God of renewal and of a future. They were a call to a restored faith and covenant between the people and their God. Faith looks forward, always. And it seems to me that this gives us a clue as to why Mark includes his story in his gospel and why it might be so important to his hearers and readers as they try to get their heads and hearts around this new catastrophe for Jerusalem. Perhaps Mark could have reminded them also of the words of Jeremiah, centuries before Jesus, predicting the destruction of the temple, Solomon's temple, the one before Herod's. Or Mark might have even reminded people of the experience of the people in exile in Babylon. "How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land?" they'd cried, never realising that 2,500 years later, Boney M would have a top 10 disco hit with that same song. Mark could have reminded them that they had survived, that their faith had lived, and they had been restored to Jerusalem. But since his focus was the Jesus community, he chose to draw his people back to Jesus' words about the temple. And for Jesus, the temple was clearly being relocated. Or more accurately, the bricks and mortar temple is not to be the primary meeting place with God. For Mark's gospel, humanity's meeting with God is no longer to be limited by physical place, as important as that can be. The destruction, the fall of the temple, the violence and persecution are not sure signs of what is to come. This is not the end. These things may occur, and they may indeed be occurring, but it's not the end, says Mark. All things are changing, he says, even the way God will engage with the world. The temple is not the focal point anymore. The resurrection is. Now, some have heard this over the years as an attack on the temple and the religion of Israel. Now, there may be something of that in Mark. We don't know for sure. But I don't think we need to go down that track. This affirmation of Jesus is much more than that. It's a statement of faith that God is not undone by catastrophe. By that, the idea that their calling as a people of God is still to look forward. When the past and the present are failing, he could be saying, look forward. That's where you will continue to find the life-giving, dynamic Spirit we call God. To live in faith is to take a stance on the future. But if faith looks forward, what of the past? Am I dismissing the importance of the past in shaping the present and the future? Am I saying that we should never look backwards? No, I'm not. The past and the present are vital to how the future will unfold. The stories which have shaped us as people of faith and as a people of faith are essential to that future. We must look back from time to time and remember our stories. For a start, unless we look back, we can't see the story of Jesus or any of those in our scriptures. So we must look back. I don't have a problem with my past. I've had a life of many blessings. But for me, and forgive me for what comes next if you live in New South Wales, the past is a bit like Sydney. Good for a visit, but I can't live there. And I don't want to. The present and the future have much more meaning for me. I was once in a worship gathering where we were asked the question, what do you regard as the best years of the church? Many of the people there said very quickly, the 1950s and the 1960s. This was in the early 2000s. And I remember very clearly my visceral reaction to this. So the best years of the church don't include me, let alone my children or grandchildren. And then, in the midst of my sadness and my sulking, I heard the preacher say, well, it's probably time to create a new set of best years, don't you think? I managed to stifle a cheer. Just. Faith most definitely needs to look back from time to time, to nourish the looking forward, to inform it, to inspire it, to correct it, and to help name it. But if a church believes its best days as a community of God's people are behind them, then strategic plans probably aren't a lot of use. Now, faith and the church are not the same thing, but there's a fair overlap. And since my role as a minister is to help this particular church to practice and live and grow in faith, it's a key part of what I called to do, what I feel called, to encourage, to nurture a practice of faith which calls us all forward in the future of God. I've talked about one of the ways I give expression to this. Grow for your life. One of the elements of that, one of the four, is remember. Remember who we are. We are a people of God. And then there's listen. Listening to what's gone before. And each of the other elements are also about building on our heritage. The full thing is remember, listen, share, act. See these buildings? Jesus asks his disciples. Impressive as they are, they won't last. And they don't have to. What will last for these disciples is a way of living creatively through change. It's a way of taking a positive stance on the future, choosing to trust God with the future as God trusts us. That seems to me to be a pretty good calling. In the best exotic Marigold hotel, Patel, the supremely optimistic hotel manager, had a saying. I'm not sure if I completely agree with it, but I still find some inspiration. And I want to end with it. He says, everything will be all right in the end. If it is not all right, it is not yet the end. Blessings.